Well, we're pretty much full. Yes, and we're ready to start, and it's also the allotted start time. So thanks all for joining. My name is Bert Schrijver, and you are, in case you didn't see it on the screen, in the NLJUG IT Modern Leadership Summit 2024. This is a big name for an opportunity we want to give for people who have a more leadership focus to also gain some interesting knowledge and experiences at JFOL. So, well, while we were thinking about topics for this session, so last year we were talking about the impact of AI on software development. Well, what do you do if you want to find topics that are interested for people in IT leadership positions? You go to the somewhat authoritative source. What does Gartner say, right? So these are the top strategic technology trends for, well, I'm not sure if it's this year or next year. This is from May this year, so it's old already. Top 5 trends. So lots of these things are recognizable. There's AI augmented development, which is basically anything you use with Copilot or any of those AI-assisted tools. How many of you use those in your organizations? That's more than last year. And how many of you who didn't raise their hands cannot do this because of legislation or compliance or anything? Yeah, that's about the rest, right? Okay. Well, green software engineering, anything regarding trying to emit as little CO2 as possible, et cetera, as a trend. Platform engineering has been around for a while already. I say in general, platform engineering, you're solving the problem between friction, reuse, and standardization. Cloud development environments, so anything like Gitbot or stuff you can spin up in the cloud. How many of you are using this? Yeah, that's about my experience as well, not too many. And then one of the top trends is software engineering intelligence. Before you came to this session, how many of you had heard of the term SIE, or software engineering intelligence, before? Not that many, right? That was my experience as well. So I'll start with a short definition, and then we'll start introducing our panel of experts that are not here for bacon and beans. Sorry for the... Software engineering intelligence, well, if you ask Gartner again, well, Gartner is talking about software engineering intelligence platforms, so platforms that help you to measure software engineering intelligence. And they provide a unified, transparent view of engineering processes, okay, that help leaders to understand and measure not only velocity and flow, but also quality, organizational effectiveness, and business value. Typical Gartner quote. Gartner says is that by 2027, 50% of software engineering organizations will use software engineering intelligence platforms to measure and increase developer productivity, compared to 5% in 2024. So that's about in line with the amount of hands we saw here, right? So in a couple of years, at least half of you, or hopefully all of you, will use those platforms. Gartner says things like those platforms provide solutions that provide software engineering leaders data-driven visibility into the engineering team use of time and resources. Well, doesn't everyone want that? It's a fairly generic quote, I'd say. Then another definition I found from Code Together, that's probably providing these platforms. SEI systematically gathers, analyzes, and applies data throughout the software development lifecycle. So that's basically software development metrics, right, in the broader sense of words. Various sources like code repositories, issue trackers, testing tools, performance monitoring, well, and they gain actionable insights for tech leaders. It's a game changer for tech leaders because you can do informed decision based on data instead of feelings or emotions, in the worst case. Increased efficiency, proactive risk management, and better quality control. Well, I realize this is all still pretty broad and vague, so we'll dive into this a bit more in the next hour or so. But let me start with asking the panel to introduce themselves to you, and we start all the way at the left from your view. Please state your name and what you do in daily life.
All right, my name is Maxim. I am part of Picnic Technologies. We do grocery delivery in Netherlands, Germany, and France. I myself am a tech strategist in the CTO office. Work mostly the last half year-ish on this software engineering intelligence, which we call developer excellence.
My name is Michel Asberg. I work at CarePay, which is a company that provides a health insurance platform. I am a senior tech lead, and I have been working with this practice for about 2 years now. Yeah.
My name is Werner Heijstek. I work at the Software Improvement Group, SIG. We are a company specialized in software quality measurement. I've been so for 25 years. I was there for the past 12. I'm operational director of the company. We have built such a platform, actually. I think it's about 10 years old now. It's called SIGRID, and it automatically measures maintainability, scalability, cloud nativeness, architecture, security for more than 300 languages. Java might just be one. We'll talk about it later.
And my name is Marianne Hoordenborg. I work at the Dutch Chamber of Commerce, KVK. I'm a practice lead IT development back there. That means I have a hybrid role. I still spend time in development teams and also am an IT leader in the KVK. And I think this helps regard developments like these from a developer perspective.
Thank you. So my first question to any of you, and you can grab the microphone whenever you're ready to answer, is what are you currently already doing on the field of software engineering intelligence, or measuring team productivity, or measuring developer productivity?
So about a year and a half ago, we started to build a pretty extensive metrics measurement system based on our GitHub and Jira data and a couple adjacent platforms as well. Basically trying to capture as much as possible the metrics that are also used in the DORA and SPACE type frameworks. But we quickly realized that that gives lots of data, a little bit information, and almost no insights, right? So we're in the past year, we're looking into really how do we translate all of those, let's say, very quantitative information and findings and combine that with more qualitative team assessment type work. For us, that has resulted in a developer excellence framework, which we now have hired several coaches for, which we try to, in a sort of intensive pressure cooker type style, work with our teams to improve on those capabilities.
Within CarePay, we use a bunch of tools that provide us with metrics and insights in data quality. Of course, as already mentioned, like metrics don't say much if you don't know the context. So it's very crucial that when you look at those metrics and numbers, that you also see how they were gathered and have a good look in which ones you can actually use, because some of them, if you use tools like Velocity, they give you a lot of insights in BR throughput, commit sizes and stuff like that. By itself, it doesn't say much because you can quite easily manipulate those metrics. But if you take everything as a whole, you can have a bit more insight. But of course, everything has to be looked at from a context perspective as well. Yeah.
So I think with these types of measurements, you can distinguish between processes, which are very hard to measure. You can look at Jira, or there are different things, like version control mining. I think if you look at the product, though, then you need less context. I think you can pretty objectively measure whether something was built in such a way that if another developer comes after you, that they can find their way around what you've created. That's still not the norm, and I think by now we know what to do to make it easier for another human to make changes in your code, which says a lot about future productivity. So we do that at large scale. This is still not something everybody agrees with. Some people really think that their own way of developing is the best, but I think there's a pretty uniform way of predicting how easy it is for somebody to make changes to a code base. Yeah, indeed, that's not productivity today, but that's productivity for tomorrow.
Yeah, sure.
You want to add?
Yeah, at the risk of following the line in every question, but for this one, I'll add to it. I'm very happy to hear the human aspect added to the metrics. I think it's a pitfall to be driven by data only. And at KVK, we have spent a lot of time, similarly to the developer excellence, but with us it's high-performing teams implementation, and we focus a lot on culture. And from that, we expect teams to select relevant metrics to them. Because we know every team is different. Some teams are working on legacy applications, others are working as pair programming a lot. And we expect teams to be mature enough to pick their own metrics. Of course, we also have several quality platforms in place. We have worked with SIG for some of the possibilities they have. But I think you need to have a very broad perspective on this domain.
There are two things I'd like to connect to. First is Werner mentioned process quality and product quality, right? Are you all aware of the difference between process quality and product quality? Raise your hand if you are. That's enough people who did not raise their hand for me to surely explain. So product quality, if you look at software product, you can look at any of the ISO standards like 25010, right? Thank you, Geert. And this is a quality tree that says stuff like performance, scalability, how well is it testable, maintainable, usable. So these are aspects that say something about the quality of a product. And then there's process quality that says something about how good is your process. So process quality says something about predictability and repeatability. Can you get an ISO certification for producing rotten bananas? Who thinks you can get ISO certified for rotten bananas? You can get certified for process quality, because rotten bananas, if you produce the exact same type of rotten banana, exactly as rotten as it is every time, then your process is super good because you have consistent output quality. So when we look at software development, then it's indeed how good is the product that you're producing, but also how consistent are you? Do you, I don't know, go live without any issues every time, or do the amount of issues regressions highly vary? So I think it's important to realize that you can be, good in product quality and not in process quality, and vice versa, but ideally in both. And the other thing I want to connect to is, I think Maxime mentioned a couple of existing metrics, right? So there's DORA and SPACE. Does any of you care to explain those metrics? Well, Maxime mentioned them, so he gets the mic back.
Now I'm tested on my knowledge. I like it. So no, but I think it's not so much indeed about the specific ones, but the ones that matter for specific teams, right? We do measure 30 plus across all the teams, but it's not relevant for all of them, right? It's things like cycle time of pull requests. It is how long does a feature take from really the first inception to actually being in the hands of our customer. But also much more detailed, how long does the first review take? How long does a second review take? How big are the PRs? And I think all of those without context, as you also mentioned, is completely useless. And also without the team context specifically. And that's where really, well, we've started to build that bridge, and I won't say that we're good at it yet, but I'm really hopeful that we're on the right track for it. Yeah,
go ahead if you have anything to add.
I wanted to ask a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, questions is fine as well.
Derail your session then. So I think you also mentioned it that sometimes these metrics are a bit team unique, or developers get to choose. Do you think that's always the case, or are there certain metrics that you should always have in place?
Yeah, no. So I referenced to your to the SIG framework as well. I think there are a lot of undisputable metrics out there, and then you are more talking about product quality than you are about process quality necessarily. So I think there is a difference, and there are a lot of coding principles and clean code principles that apply for software, and there are many ways that you can measure ISO 25001 compatibility. So yeah.
Okay, so one thing that I wanted to ask you as an audience, well, probably some of you are in a position of spending money on software development, right? Probably not your own money, but spending budget on software development. So how do you know, as an IT leader, that the money you're spending is well spent? So ask yourself, if I now spend this amount of money on software, how do I know that I get value for my money? Do you measure this in time or output or outcome? How do you know that if I now double the money I'm putting in software development, do I get now double the outcome or double the value? Do you ever get this feedback loop, or is it just a feeling? How many of you know that your money in software development is well spent? If you feel, then raise your hand, please. Well, That's pretty shocking, right? There's almost no one. So there's 3 people who think their money is well spent. So also think like, how do you? Yes. Oh yeah, I got a big.
No, one remark.
Yeah, I'll throw you this, and you can talk in it because I like throwing it.
That's nice.
Is it on? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm not someone who can spend money, so I'm excluding myself of the question. So 3 people is not right. So who can spend money? You should have asked.
Sure.
first.
Yeah. Okay. It was okay. So people, yeah, throw it back. So can everybody raise their hand who can spend money on software development? Yeah, I get your point. So then it's about half. So, but still, you know, the question is, how do you know it's well spent? There's obviously different ways for you to pay, well, basically people or suppliers, right? So stuff you sometimes see is, that's fairly common in the Netherlands. You pay for time and material. So when you're paying usually for the hours that are spent. Who finds that weird? I'm in the business of delivering hours for time spent, but actually it's kind of weird because you're getting paid more if you take longer. If you do something in 5 hours, you get paid less than if you take 10 hours. So that's, I think, a pretty weird way of paying for software. And you're paying not for the result, but for the amount of hours that somebody spends. Well, you can have time and material with KPIs. So you need to deliver at least this or that or these kind of things. You can do output-based. So how much or how good amount of software is delivered. But then how do you measure this? Do you get paid for the lines of code you produce? Well, it's easy to write lines of code that you get paid more, right? And then there's outcome-based. So with outcome-based, you pay for, basically how happy you are. So does the system that has been built by these external contractors fulfill my needs? How happy are the users? What's the, the NPS score from my users? How happy is the business? Does the software that was built actually help us to, run a smoother business? So I'm curious about your experiences here. And I see that Werner would love to give an answer.
Yeah, I don't get why we laugh at lines of code, because and why we propose things that other departments in an organization are also responsible for. So lines of code is what you make at the end of the day, right? So just counting the amount of lines definitely does not make sense. There are a million different ways to build the exact same functionality. But then we're not done with lines of code, right? We have to make them, and we can discount for how well they were built, right? Do they adhere to certain standards and non-functionally? And then we can look at volume. And maybe it's hard to benchmark this, but at least we can look at whether you can consistently do a certain amount. Should it be the key metric to be paid on? Of course not. But should it be an indicator we laugh at and not look at? That's kind of weird. I think software developers, at the end of the day, make software. You wanted to say something?
How good can you catch? Probably I cannot throw that far. So the people in between, you're... not bad.
We had a sprint recently where we only deleted code.
Those are great sprints, by the way. Great sprints.
So this minus lines of code also count. That's interesting, right? But you get paid double for those lines?
But who said you shouldn't count the minus? I mean, that's positive. That's a lot. But deleting is harder than writing. So it's great that you've done that. How's that? What's the counter argument there?
What's the counter argument?
Yes. How do you?
Yeah, I think that deleting makes things less complex. So yes. It's a better way to maintain your system. So your maintainability will increase.
It's true. So less code is easier to find your way around. It has fewer places for things to hide. So it's definitely just better. So deleting is something that should happen much more often. Yeah.
Okay. So the interesting metric, right, to get paid by the amount of code that you deleted while still keeping the system the same amount of functionality, which in essence make the system more maintainable because there are less lines of code to have a look at, right? So let's move on to a couple of other questions I have, and there's lots of room for questions for you as well. In your organizations, how do you measure team productivity? Do you look at teams or do you look at individuals or both? I'm curious to hear what you're doing.
Yeah, with us, we look at teams and even bigger groups, and we have planning events. We have the OBA in place, and the business and the board also measure progress and productivity on a larger level. So it's not going to be on an individual developer level so much. That is part of the conversation in retrospectives and in performance interviews.
Yeah, maybe to very quickly reflect on the small laugh about the time and material. We have the blessing of having 300 plus people on our own payroll, but that is basically time and material people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we do, of course, measure productivity, and there's a very clear split between what we measure for individuals, which is a, let's say, HR people team responsibility, and what we measure in terms of productivity for teams, which is basically my responsibility within developer excellence. So I think both components are critical to create high-performing teams, but are very separate at the same time.
Can you give an example of the things you measure on individual level?
So on the individual level, there's a very big role of the tech leads on the team to identify sort of the behaviors and characteristics that goes actually pretty far beyond just quantitative measurements and metrics, but there is dashboards available to help. But ultimately, that's much more also based on judgment. If people are performing well compared to their peers, etc. But for teams, we use all the metrics that people don't like as at least in the background, but also just as a point or dot on the horizon or as a guiding principle. So lines of code, yes. PRs per developer, yes. All are very important metrics, not just for the specific number we're at, but for the trend that they show, right? It's not that we aim for 10, but we aim for a combined behavior of several metrics in a specific direction, which we think will help the team in their productivity.
We do both, actually. We look at team performance and then also looking at quality, reliability and scalability from different kind of metrics. And on individual level, we have one-on-ones with our devs in the teams, where we look at individual contributions, like how is the impact that you have in a team. It should be balanced, right? Like if you have 6 or 5 members in your team and one dev does 60% of the work and the rest does 10, you have an imbalanced team. And from the outside perspective, it might look that you have a very performant team. But if you look closer, there's just one person that's very performant, and the rest is maybe. So
how do you know this? So how do you know that somebody does, let's say, 60% of the work? What defines which data do you have that tells you that that's one person does 60% of the work?
Yeah. So what we usually do is like you look at the sprints that we deliver. You look at the amount of work that is done, and also have a look at like complexity of that work. So it's not like you can base that on exact metrics like PR throughput or commit rates or like number of lines of code, but it's more of like looking at a holistic point of view, like which features do we deliver, what was the contribution of which individual, and then look at it from how can we make the rest of the team work as performant or as much on those type of functionalities by pairing people up in the team to have them learn from a person that's very good in a certain type of work, to have others also pick that up, reducing single point of failures and interchangeability within the team to be more performant as individuals.
Yeah. So I guess you're getting most of that data from your a Git solution, issue trackers, sprint trackers, and pull requests, etc. That type of data, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I wonder how long it's going to take before we're going to get IT leadership intelligence platforms. Do you have any information on that, Bert-Jan?
Do you mean like general IQ tests or?
Well, that would be a good start, because talking about this subject, which I care about a lot. I mean, to me as a practice lead, it's very important that our developers can perform. I mean, it makes them happy as well, right? So you want to be able to produce valuable code, valuable applications, not be woken up at night because there are disruptions. You wanna enjoy your profession, and a lot of the stuff that make our work hard and that we have to deal with is around writing code and producing software. So if we are building software, are these the right features? Have the questions in the business been answered well? Have they asked why often enough? Is there a new manager that just has a slightly different view on things and wants everything different, and it puts us behind on other change because there is something they want. So I think it's hyper important to focus on the intelligence around the software engineer.
Yeah, well, I want to continue on two things that you said. First is that you mentioned on, if we measure team productivity, it also matters whether a team is moving in the right direction, right? And how well is the input they get. So what I usually say is that, success or progress is a vector. A team can go super fast, then you have a really long vector, but the direction where it's heading also matters, right? If you're going super fast in the wrong way, then you're not going anywhere. If you're going slow in the right way, then you're probably doing better. So therefore, the structurization and the prioritization of the work that flows to a team, I think is also super important. Other thing I wanted to touch on is, I think that Maxime said, and I know that Werner probably has an opinion about, is about measuring points in time or measuring overall, let's say progress or differences in data, right? So in general, my experience is that if you get like one point in time, this person did 5 code reviews in a sprint. Ooh, 5? That's impressive, or not? Were those 5 one-line code reviews or 5,000-line code reviews, right? So context there obviously also matters. But in general, I found that just throwing this data at a team, well, nobody likes to be measured and then somebody says, well, you did well based on this number that we measured about you, right? But if you take progress over time and then give those data to teams, that's something that usually teams are open to having a look at and then figuring out why are our, a number of code reviews are going down. Do we have bigger stories or less to review? Why do we have more issues when we go live? Did we work too hard or whatever? So I'm curious, Werner, about your experience with tracking data over time, providing insights there, because that's, I guess, one of the things that your platform is doing, right?
Yes. So first, it's related, but also a bit towards your point, is if you talk to, so most of my work consists of talking either to senior management or to developers. This is always a connection issue. Mostly it's either one of assessments where there's some kind of fight with the supplier or developers or things are slow, or it's integrating cigarette where we want to get organizations to not just tell developers bad when the software's not working, but they actually people take some responsibility and say, hey, there's a policy for security, and it's not just this 300 page on the wiki, but it's something that fits your definition of done, and right. So we try to create that dialogue, which is super hard. But I think if I can talk to you as slightly more on the software development side, sometimes you're not giving any insight. It's a sort of a super black box. So I get that people try to invent metrics that say something about the output, because there's not much to be seen in the black box. Often when I talk to managers, they go, I have 40 development teams, and I can't ask them anything. I can't ask them when things are done. They say, put it on the backlog, we'll decide. But I have to pay them, and they're not cheap. So how do I deal with this? And if I ask, there are a couple, if I ask them a question, they get really angry, and I don't want them to be angry because then they leave, and that's a problem. And you hear variations of this. So I get that people try to sort of invent metrics around it, but mostly developers bat them back and say, this is a dumb one. This requires context. This is nonsense. I'm not doing that one. I know how to optimize that one. And in the end, there's not much more than the deadline, and nobody really understands, because that software developers also can help themselves by saying there's an enormous amount of technical debt that I have to work my way around every day. Shall I try to quantify that for you so you understand why I'm not done tomorrow with this change that you think is really simple but actually is really, really hard? They have no idea. They don't understand that often in senior management. It's changing. Management's getting more technical, but on average, no. That was and your question was about the data, the trends.
Yeah. So trends in data versus points in time, where you just look at a snapshot of data.
Yeah, so snapshots are, so often a lot can happen between snapshots. So it's the more fine-grained, the better, but that has a risk of data overload. I think what I really liked about your contribution is say, that's fine, data overload. We'll just, we'll look at a whole bunch of things. I'm actually kind of curious if you then also throw some kind of regression analysis and see, is it predictive of something? So you don't really have an opinion on the metrics then, but just say, these seem to predict really well how predictable, or how when we deliver something, for example.
Yeah, so I have the luxury of having 2 data analysts on my team that don't have to spend their time on anything else but just explore all these metrics, right? And they also don't have a very strong developer background, but they do understand the general process. So they are able to sort of understand what's going on, but they don't have a very strong opinion on good or bad. And I think that's super helpful in our case. So they are able to have the conversation. They make sure that the metrics are put in context, right? Or half of the team was sick this week. So, but also, well, we worked on this horrendous deadline for a month, so the team is taking it easy for the coming weeks. So putting all that type of stuff into context, yes, we see lots of correlations. Most of them don't make sense, but some do, and some are really interesting. So we do see over the past year that with a roughly similar size team, we have doubled the number of PRs and we've halved the size per PR. So in general, currently we think it's an okay trend, but of course that doesn't mean that we want that to go even further. It is just that we've acknowledged that well, something is changing. Generally, teams are happy about it. So that also helps us now compare, let's say, best performing teams against some of the teams that have not shown that change over time to see what was different there. Are they already at that level, or is actually help they need, or some capability they miss? And that's where then that coaching team we have comes in, where we can really specifically help them on a very targeted topic. So we don't send a coach in saying, here's a team, go help them. But here's a team, we have analyzed lots of metrics about them. We think the general direction of the problem is somewhere in work planning. Please figure it out with them whether that's really the case, and then if so, what direction sort of you want to go with them to hopefully reflect something in outcome that changes, right? And I think that distinction between there's hard numbers, but using them sort of in a soft way.
So what I like is that you said we gather loads of data. We have 2 people whose full-time job is to make sense of this data. We see a pattern, like the amount of reviews goes up and the size of views goes down. And now we're thinking and we're basically debating whether we think this is a good thing or not. So I think this shows how careful you should be with drawing conclusions based on metrics, right? Because there may be all kinds of external or internal factors where something may be a good thing or not. Do we have any questions from the audience? Whoa, okay. Let's do a round of questions. We have a catch box somewhere. I think Ramon here was first. Not bad. Nice header.
It's a soft box.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes. So I've been listening now for half an hour, and maybe it's a bit old school, but I always think that if you're a leader, you work with people. So you look at the people you work with, and now I have a feeling that it's like very technical to analyze if people are productive. I also, well, a couple of trends that we see in the IT market is people don't see each other anymore face to face, so they don't hang out at the coffee machine. They see each other one day every 2 weeks. But also they see these metrics and they communicate, well, on Slack, asynchronous. How do you see that these metrics affect team cohesion in regards with remote working and how they participate as a team? Because I think this also has been a big issue with these metrics, that people among their team members start to blame each other because they are not productive.
We had lots of questions, so let's do one answer per question so we can go through some of the more questions.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I hear people say about their day at the office, I'm not productive on that day. Yeah. And I try explaining that the productivity from a day like that is in later terms where you have built your relationship with the people around you or the ones you coincidentally meet at the coffee machine. So this is really an important topic. Also, you risk greenwashing. So we have dashboards managers look at dashboards. If something is not green, they don't like it, and you have the tendency, all people have the tendency to start greenwashing. And I think I'm a very big advocate at KVK for interpreting the data that we see and avoiding stoplight colors in dashboards.
All right. Who wants to ask the next question? You were first. Same row.
Thank you very much. My name is Yusuf. Assuming that every business has a different goal, or maybe a set of goals, different priorities. So how do you align the business goals and its priorities with what you measure? And how do you convince actually sometimes maybe the business or otherwise vice versa, the development teams?
So I think this is often not done with software. And I think non-functionals are a simple example. I just quickly gave the security example where for some, often when you ask people about non-functionals and software, they just say the best, the most, the best performance, the best scalability, which is, if you then quantify how much that costs, of course, they have a different opinion. You need to make trade-offs, and these trade-offs come from your company objectives. So what is your risk appetite when it comes to security? How much do you really want to scale and when? And you should make sure that trickles down to your software organization so that they know what to work with on the short and the longer term, and they can think about that in architectural terms. That connection is often absent. And there might be people there that play a role in making that translation, but in my experience, the actual produced software is not often linked well enough or checked well enough compared to these higher level organizational objectives. You don't see that a lot, although it might be so the case in your organization.
Yeah.
So is there any silver bullet then? So can we say like this metric should always be done, like the amount of code or maybe the code coverage?
Well, no silver bullet ever, right? But I think what often happens if you have a business objective and then ask to the tech team, how do you think you contribute? The answer is often, yes, we contribute, but maybe only a small part. And then there's, in our case, often, and then there's operations. And they do whatever they want, and then stuff doesn't happen anymore, right? And it's not about putting the full responsibility to deliver on that objective to that specific tech team, but making it, drilling down a bit and making it, for example, into a non-functional that you can actually measure. So for us, that means, so we do lots of order picking, right? We collect orders for customers, sort of why we exist. That we do at the specific speed we want to reach. We call that units per hour. And that basically, one, it obviously means that the system needs to be available, but we also have then a non-functional that describes, well, the pick endpoint needs to process in 300 milliseconds, or less probably, Slava knows. And there is an SLO and a dashboard and everything on top, but making the team responsible for something they can fully influence and showing them why it matters, right? It's the endpoint on its own doesn't really matter, but how it contributes to being a successful company does. And I think making that link very explicit without putting the responsibility fully on that one team is, I think, a starting point. I mean, there's lots of things that are still going to be very hard, but it's a starting point to show at least that link between how you support delivering to business objectives.
Thank you. I saw a hand there. Just across the room. Oh, pretty good, pretty good.
So, in the beginning, you mentioned the Gartner part, and it talked about business value. I've not heard once end users or customers or any of those. Well, in the end, you're making software for a certain goal. So, how would you go about introducing metrics, measuring end customers?
I think NPS scores are important to figure out how a team is performing and what part they played in the whole end-to-end flow, right? Like.
So do you feedback NPS scores to the teams?
Of course, yeah. Like a team can spend a lot of time, for instance, on performance optimizations, on database levels or whatever. That's not a visual representation if you look at pure statistic metrics, right? Like lines of code or whatever. But if you look at the NPS score that comes out of that, if we improve the usability of our system tremendously, that very small change that they made, which they maybe spent like days on to figure out where to tweak the performance in such areas that it actually get to a better result. Those NPS scores will actually be very crucial to figuring out if a team is actually adding better business value and making it more usable for the end user.
So who in here has data on how happy the end users of the software that you are building are? How many of you have data about end user happiness? That's about the max 1/3, 25% maybe. And I agree that it can be difficult to measure, right? Depending on if you can go talk to these people, then it's relatively easy. If there's 1 million people that use an app that you build software for, well, you're not going to talk to them all. But then maybe you can do it like user interviews or have them do surveys or whatever. But it's not an easy thing to measure. But I think that goes for loads of the topics we're discussing here.
Abandoning flows.
Yeah. So like, whether they stop in a funnel or something, how many errors do they get, what's their waiting time, etc. But still, maybe somebody can still be pretty happy if they abandoned halfway from a system that was super slow. So that's depending on their use case.
Yeah, and prioritizing what features to work on. At Kafka, we also have the customer journey experts that, based on data, but also on qualitative interviews, determine what aspects of the customer journey are most dissatisfactory and that we can work on if we can influence it at that point. And that helps, of course, also the satisfaction in the teams to deliver business value that is very observable.
I have a question back to the audience. Is there anyone in here who knows exactly how happy your users are with the software you're building? Or like, well...
What you did?
I don't know. There's no universal scale for happiness, but does anyone have exact data on this is the I don't know, the NPS score, for example, that my users give my app or something? Who has this?
NS here?
Yeah. So for those who have, how do you measure this? Just shout if you have the answer. In your case?
Ticket satisfaction.
Ticket satisfaction? So like you mean like in Jira tickets or something like this?
Yeah, Zendesk tickets.
Yeah. So customer service tickets then. Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah. Quality NPS. So that's like some research you do to get the data. Yeah. Tickets is interesting. So then you have end users creating Zendesk with support system tickets, and after they're finished, they can give like how happy where you are with. Oh, okay. Yeah. Annual survey. Yeah. Sure. It's still not super easy to get this data hearing from you all, right? Next question. Who had a question? Up front here.
In 2001, the manifest for HR software development names 12 principles.
Can we open the throw box? I think it's... Oh, maybe we threw it too hard. Okay. Can you throw it back? I'll see if I can fix it. Just speak and... All right, we're there, right? Yeah. We just fixed it by throwing.
Okay, 2000...
Can you bring it super close?
2000.
No, okay, just speak loud.
In 2001, the manifest for HR software development named 12 principles. Thank you.
I was speaking to my own microphone.
One is build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. Do you think that your efforts conflict with one of these principles?
I was focused on holding the microphone, so who wants to answer? I couldn't follow exactly, but that...
Most measurements are actually curious what your teams think about.
What they think about the fact that we measure. Now, I think that is what we learned after the first half year, that we went maybe a bit overboard, right? And we got also, I like at least the fact that people were open enough to tell us, right? So they basically said, well, you're now only for the past half year have been looking at the numbers. There's more. And that is really where we pivoted our approach. So probably, yes, you're right, there is conflict. But I also truly believe you cannot do it without any of it, right? But it's finding that balance. And as I mentioned also in the beginning, we're not yet there. We went overboard a bit on the metric side, and now hopefully we go overboard a bit on the people coaching individual side, and then we find the middle ground.
We have, I think, a response there. I'll bring you the mic.
I think this is really interesting because this is my work. I take many sensors and I then integrate it, SIG, Sonar Cloud, all these sensors, and then we go to teams and we determine the software quality. So what's interesting is that everything in this meeting is top-down, but actually it's a really useful tool for the developer to go to your product owner, to go to your product manager and say, here, this is the situation. Is this what we want? You can make it very quantitative, what your situation is, and that it might not actually be in line with the non-functional requirements of your solution. So yeah, I just wanted to add that it's not only something for management, it's really something that the developers here can use as an argument. So yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Close, so it helps.
Thanks. Yeah, the way I often address is that you have to make the thing right and make the right thing, right? And make the right thing, I think that's the ultimate end goal. But with making a thing right, you also can introduce a lot of complexity. And what I found in this whole discussion here is that you measure what you can measure. And code is very simple to measure, right? Lines of code, PRs, all these things. Whereas, for instance, complexity is much, much harder. So just by looking at the bricks you build, and maybe even the whole portion of bricks, you forget how the building's looking like, whereas the building, the complexity you introduce, will actually slow down as a business. So for now, I still haven't found meaningful metrics that tell you what kind of complexity introduced because you built distributed monoliths or you just increased the monolith you have already much more, even maybe with a lot of PRs and less lines of code, but overall you will slow down your company. And this measure is something which, in my practice, is missing. So my question would be to you, the panel, and to people, do you have something useful for that?
I have a hunch that the software and group improvement group would like to comment on this question.
Yes, but code is somehow distinguished from architecture, as if architecture does not live in code. Right? You can measure complexity of code very simple. Right? You can start with the decision points, and then you can make it a very technical discussion. It's a very human discussion, actually, because the average human cannot take more than approximately 6 or 7 of those points in their heads. And then they don't know how to write a unit test for it anymore, or how to even change it. Maintainability is very human-centric. But architecture you can measure. You can visualize architecture. There's all types of ways that components can depend upon each other. You can visualize this. It's a very interesting process, because if you ask a developer, first of all, you ask for documentation. And then they say, no, at the Azure manifest, and it says no documentation. That's not what it says, but that's what most people think. So there's no documentation, and you might recognize this. So then the second question is, can you then draw me an architecture image of your software? And then they draw something on a whiteboard. If you ask the same question to a same developer in that team, you're going to get a slightly different architecture. So where does the architecture live? In the code. So you can visualize that, and you can actually have an opinion on the complexity there. Do you see circular dependencies? Do you see certain patterns or anti-patterns that you might expect based on the intended architecture design? This is all objectively measured. This is a solved problem. The fact that not so many people use it is a different problem. And so I invite you to come and talk a bit more about how to do this. It's nice. You'd like it.
So if one thing is clear to me is that we can talk about this topic for hours and hours, but we only have minutes left. You can find the names of all panelists in the timetable in the NLJUG app. You can look them up on LinkedIn. They're probably all there, and continue the conversation afterwards, or come afterwards here and talk to them. To wrap up, I'd like to ask our panel one final question. And that is about all we talked about today, software engineering, intelligence, and metrics and productivity in general. What is one thing you think that people in the audience can and should start doing tomorrow?
Put the tools in the hands of the teams. So I'm with you. So it is true that it can be a very well used bottom-up tool, and the team can actually give context and talk about the impediments that they experience while delivering software. Talk about architecture that has been there for a long time and that is challenging. Open your ears as an IT lead and be aware that it's a human job.
So what to measure? So if you're a manager, measure maintainability, because it's the nice thing to do for all your developers in the future, because it's so much nicer for everybody to work in well-maintainable code. If you're a developer, you should write code as if the person who's going to maintain it after you is a violent psychopath who knows where you live. Just.
I think indeed give them the insights of the tools, give them the metrics, and have them set their own goals and make yourself available for them to make sure that they have the tools and means to meet their goals, and see, of course, after they've set their goals and met them, do a retro, see if that actually had the end result that they were expecting, and start over again, and just do that in an iterative process indeed.
Yeah, I remember now a few times people said a very top-down type of thinking, and that's what I hope you don't get out of this, right? Because to me, developer excellence is very much about how you help teams and empower them to become the best version of their own team. And it's actually not so much about what sort of management wants from them. About if you set up a structure that a team is productive and works on the right things, they will ultimately, or that goes hand in hand with a happy team, which obviously everybody also wants, and then the business results will come as an effect rather than because you actively push for it so hard. So to me, this is not top down at all.
So we're at the end of the session. Please give a round of applause to our amazing panel.